Good evening. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I am Stephanie Pavlantos. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining us.
That's right. And Stephanie, do you need another moment to get
I
things
got it.
going?
Get faster.
You are. You're getting faster. All right. We are continuing with our book study this evening. So thanks for joining us. And we hope that you've got the book and you've been reading through. We're about halfway through, I think. We should begin to think through what we're going to be doing next. But there's like a little mini chapter, just a tiny couple of pages. And then he goes into a really good, we had a lot of interesting things to look at.
Yes. Good chapter.
Big chapter, chapter 4, called The Captain of My Soul. And it really looks at individualism versus collectivism and
how that affects us as we read
big time. Yeah. And I think that there was a lot of information in that chapter and some really exciting things that
I agree.
Very, very eye-opening. And even if you're not a introvert, it affects you. I think even if you think you're an extrovert and, have lots of friends and a collective attitude mindset, it's not what you think it is.
Because it's not a Western culture thing.
No, not at all.
We're all about us, and we read the Bible thinking it's all about us.
And it's not. It is not.
I actually taught on that last week.
Did ya?
And I'm just like, I found the coolest little reel. And again, I don't, you take it with a grain of salt if you want, but I believe the message is true. But a man had a pastor, he'd been a pastor all of his adult life, and he had a near-death experience, and he went and stood before the Lord, and the Lord said, "Dear Pharisee," and he's like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? I've done nothing but call on you. I've shared you with people." And he goes, "But you've not made me, Lord." And he said, the biggest idol that the church worships is self. And so it was very eye-opening that's how we read the Bible and what we think when we go to church. So I think understanding what an idol is, and that we ourselves, when we look in the mirror, we make ourselves an idol. Keep that in mind as we go through this chapter. I think
definitely
applies.
Definitely. Do you want to talk a little bit about that little part 2 section?
Yeah. So
okay.
He gives a literal back translation, and this is from the way they understand Psalm 23 in Laos. And it's interesting because this is taking the translation from Laos, and I don't know what language they speak, but it's taking their translation and putting it into English, literally putting it into English. Right. And so do you want me to read this?
Yeah, if you want to, or it doesn't matter. I thought it was interesting because we have a hard time going just from Greek to English, and we think, we have, it's not quite what we would say or something. But imagine trying to go from another language or another mindset. And I think this is a really good example of how things do get lost in translations. And it's not that it's wrong, right? Like people say, well, it's mistranslated. No, it's not that it's wrong, but it's trying to get to another language and another culture and another way somebody's going to understand it. So go ahead and read it.
So make sure you leave comments and questions, because I think this chapter has a lot of things that we can comment and question about. So anyway, here's Psalm 23 according to how this tribe in Laos understands it. The great boss is the one who takes care of my sheep. I don't want to own anything. The great boss wants me to lie down in the field. He wants me to go to the lake. He makes my good spirit come back. Even though I walk through something the missionary calls the valley of the shadow of death. So obviously that part, they have no understanding of what that means. I do not care. You are with me. You use a stick and a club to make me comfortable. You
It's interesting.
manufacture a piece of furniture right in front of my eyes while my enemies watch. You pour car grease on my head. That was a little funny, but
Uh-huh.
my cup has too much water in it and therefore overflows. Goodness and kindness will walk single file behind me all my life,
Mm.
and I will live in the hut of the great boss until I die and am forgotten by my tribe. So
Mm.
you see a few things. Obviously, they don't understand that it's like olive oil, but it's car grease to them. Okay.
Right.
But also, they don't understand the valley of the shadow of death. And I don't know that we do either. But they also don't understand to live in the hut of the great, to be with the Lord.
Right.
And they see that it's forgotten, because that they will be forgotten by their
Right.
tribe. I think that's very interesting, because I don't know, maybe we think that way sometimes, like I'll be forgotten when I die, but I don't think that those who love you, we don't feel like they will forget us, and we don't feel like the people we see when we go to heaven, obviously we think will be rejoined with people.
Yeah.
So I think we see it a little bit differently.
Yeah. He says, page 92, the
Mm-hmm.
line that actually brings comfort to Westerners is the idea that I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So we see
Yes.
that as comforting, but it's terrifying to them. That's a
Mm-hmm.
terrifying thought to them, because
Mm-hmm.
it's an idea of being presented that they're going to go somewhere else
Mm-hmm.
and be alienated from their ancestors, and they'll
Yeah.
be living away from their relatives.
And that's
And
right. And that's a very Asian understanding. I mean,
mhm,
even like when you, I mean, okay, so Disney made Mulan,
right,
and I'm not like saying go watch it or anything. I'm just
mhm,
saying that I remember watching that with my kids when they were young, and all they talked about were their ancestors, and their
right,
ancestors came to help them. And
right,
and I know that we had a Celtic thing that we would repeat in a church that we used to go to. And in one line, it's about like the communion. We were actually, it was like a leader and a congregation, kind of a saying and a response to it.
mhm,
And there was one line that our pastor actually ended up taking out after the first time we repeated it, because it was talking about my ancestors looking
mhm,
down on
mhm,
me. And he took that out because, it wasn't how we see things. It's
right.
not part of our culture to think that all our ancestors are still having a part of our life.
Right. Yeah. The other point that he says we've become influenced through the Greek thinking is that we die and we go somewhere, like we're going to go there,
Yeah,
and that's
it goes
from
without
the
saying.
the Greek mythology aspect of crossing the river Styx, or
Mm-hmm.
um, he
Yeah,
says ancient Greek
yeah,
mythology describes the dead as crossing the river Styx or going into Hades. And the Bible really doesn't say, heaven is going to be somewhere
crossing
else.
the
Actually,
Jordan.
there's more description of heaven being here on earth, in a
Mm-hmm.
recreated heaven, or a new earth and a new Garden of Eden reconstruction,
Right.
that new heaven, new earth. So there's more evidence biblically that says it's here. It's not
Mm-hmm.
really there. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
we
Yeah.
definitely are influenced
Yeah.
by a Greek thought, and
Right. And how influenced our old hymns are.
yeah, yeah,
He said, and he gives like, he leadeth me. The
yeah,
third stanza reads, and when my task on earth is done,
hmm,
when by thy grace the victory's won, even death's cold wave, I will
hmm,
not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me.
right.
And he says, like all these titles, he gave like a half a dozen
He
titles of
did.
songs that include crossing the Jordan. And that's not biblical. We don't,
Right.
don't. that's taken actually from, like you said, the Greek
Crossing the
culture.
river Styx. Right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah. So
It's interesting to think about that. But
yeah, he even gives us it says, look at God's dwelling places now among the people, he'll dwell with them. So even how God will dwell here on earth with us.
yeah.
So that's Revelation 21:3. So,
Mhm.
just interesting. And everybody talks about dying and going away, going to heaven. But in actuality, we're going to be here. So just a
Well, I mean,
different.
there's the whole thing that says, what Paul in one of
Mhm.
which book I can't remember, probably Corinthians, but he says, absent absent
That's up
from,
in the body.
present with the Lord. So
Right.
there's in some way, and but there are different beliefs. I mean, there are people out there who teach that we're in a holding place until we're
Right.
resurrected.
Right.
So, I think most often in my life, the thing I've come to believe is just what Paul said, that
Mhm.
I die here, I go in spirit to be with the Lord, but
Mhm.
until my body is resurrected
Mhm.
along with everybody else's, I don't have it.
Right.
So
I would agree with that until the millennial kingdom and until
yeah,
the new heaven and earth descent. I mean, there's
there
definite
is a
description of, and
resurrection of all of
yes,
our bodies,
right.
but I believe our soul, our spirit is eternal, and we will be with the Lord in some way, shape, or form. So it
Linda
may
says
not look like this earth, but
she likes the term the great boss. That's,
yeah,
yeah,
I thought that was funny.
yeah, very different. I mean, there's, we just different cultures, and you
And
just
I
never
think that would be
know.
offensive to people.
Yeah, yeah.
Who are
Some folks would
the
think
great
that would,
boss. Oh no,
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely, definitely. Well, that was just a little insert that he put in there just to kind of really. They said too, we could have really put this in the previous chapter where it was talking about just words, but I think they wanted to expound on it a little bit more and really kind of dig into a little more.
yeah,
But the next chapter, we went ahead and included the two because there just wasn't enough in there to.
that was just a few pages long.
Yeah. So the
Um,
next one.
Captain of My Soul is chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
And they start actually about the Japanese culture and other Asian cultures
Right.
that really are more like they were actually talking about how difficult it was to convert the Japanese culture to Christianity or
Right.
anything, to Messiah, because they would have to ask. They turned as a family, right? That
Mm-hmm.
was what, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, he was saying that they would spend a lot of time in witnessing and sharing, and before a official decision was made, they would say, "Let me go check it with my father or my
Or my
uncle,"
aunt,
or
or my
and the missionary would think, "Oh, well, they're just making excuses," but ultimately, it wasn't that they were making
right,
excuses. It's just that the collective of community is so strong
yeah,
that
and that's most
decisions,
Asian.
we are trained here in America. Your decisions are individual, and
Mhm.
yeah, sure, you might have to speak with a husband or one or two,
Right,
maybe one family member at the most if it's a really big decision like buying a house or something. But
right.
personal decisions are that's your choice. You make
Hmm.
that choice yourself. So
Yeah, but Middle Eastern and Asian cultures, they're all about collective culture. Like the family finds a spouse for you. The
right,
family, you know, and he even mentions in Indonesia, if you go and get married without your family, you can
yeah.
be kicked out of their churches. Like
Right.
they're
That he had an example like the church was trying to decide whether or not to allow this couple to come or not, and he's like, "What did they do that's so terrible?" And they're like, "They eloped." And he laughed, and he didn't even realize he had offended them.
yeah,
And I think the point that they were trying to make is like, why would you make such an important decision like a marriage
yeah,
alone? Like, why would you make such a,
yeah, yeah,
that's, and especially as a young person, at 20 years old or a teenager, or, you're too young to even understand what you might possibly need as a spouse. Why in the world would you ever make a decision that young? So very different from American thinking.
So he spends the first part of this chapter on a collective culture versus an individualistic culture, which we in America and probably most of Europe is. And I wouldn't even say most of Europe, because I think some of probably the older countries are probably more collective than we realize, but collective is basically, you have arranged marriages, you have, think of Amish, I guess, even in my mind, even they're the best example we have in this country as a collective culture, because they do everything they look alike in every way. They work together in community. They don't accept outsiders. You do what they do to be part of their community. It's all about community. So I think we have gotten too far from that, because we're not community minded much anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree with that.
So that was the introduction to his real point, which is not understanding the collective culture affects how we read the Bible.
Right. He makes a point on page 96. The person's identity comes by distinguishing herself from the people around her. She's encouraged to avoid peer pressure and be an independent thinker. She will make her decisions regardless of what others think. She may defy her parent with her choice of a college major, a career, or a spouse. The highest goal and virtue in this sort of culture is being true to one's self.
And he compares that with, in our culture, try to put your kids in uniforms. No, they don't like that. They don't want
to just try to enforce a dress code at school and see what happens. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right, it is. I mean, my daughter has actually a very strict dress code at work. So, and it was very, it was very difficult at first to oh, wow, I have to go buy an entire new wardrobe, so, and then he also compares the military and the, a team sport as being a collective culture, because it's all about the team, except there's always that, most valuable player or that kind of thing coming out of a team sport. You will give honor or respect to somebody who is going above and beyond in a team sport. So, and the same with the military.
I want to actually answer Lucille's.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So why are people opposed to dress code? So Lucille, I teach in high school, and two things. One is, our dress code is you can't have your stomach showing, and you can't have short. You have to some sort of modesty. But so it's funny because the style of today is very immodest, very immodest. So they want to follow the collective idea, and they want to follow that. Yet they'll say it's for individual expression. But they're following instead, the individual expression today would actually put some clothes on, right? But they want to follow the collective style. It's in style. So that's what they're doing. But you'd be very, it's appalling. The lack of clothing that both boys and girls are wearing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And she makes a comment, what's your daughter's dress code? And again, it's really, it's not a bad dress code. It's just that actually it goes against all the clothes out there. That's all it does. It goes against that. Nothing too tight. They should not be, looking at your, behind as they're walking behind you. They should not be able to see it. They want something that is modest, something that is non-clingy, not tight clothes. There's nothing wrong with that. It was just that in her, I knew what you meant. But yeah, so it's just different. It was just different because some of the clothes that she has worn. But your mom makes a good point.
Yeah.
We don't. And years ago, we were at a church that was more lax, and I think most churches are more lax. I mean, there are people who wear shorts. I mean, I grew up, you did not.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple come from a previous church visit this church that we were now a part of, and he came in a suit and she came in a dress, and they felt very overdressed.
Oh, wow.
And ended up not coming back.
Interesting.
And so, yeah.
Your church does have a dress code. Interesting.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think dress code is one way of interesting, like the collective versus non-collective. I mean, so there's hints of it still around, and Stephanie was talking about like the military, that is a collective mind. He gives a few other examples, like it's still there, like it's
like a team sport. You all dress the same.
Exactly. And so it's in our society, but it's definitely,
but it's not totally accepted.
It's not the norm anymore. It's definitely not the norm anymore.
And kids do not want to go to a school where they have to wear the same thing, and you understand why they do that. You know, a lot of Christian schools have a uniform. Catholic schools have a uniform. And they do that for a reason, but it does cause it, a lot of kids don't like it.
Yeah. So. All right. Well, let's continue on. Let's see what else we've got.
So that was page 98 and 99 at the top. And then he brought up the names. Do you remember that on 99? The difference between individualistic and collective cultures is how names work. And he goes,
oh, yeah. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So we get our three name, our first, middle, and last name, kind of from the Roman tradition.
Yeah.
But in Asia, the last name is what they go by. They kind of go by their last name first, and then their Is that right? Is that
it's the family name. I believe their name is their family name. Right. Right. So it says, let's see if I can find the quote here where it talks about the individual name would be abbreviated. M would be for Marcus. Western culture wants to differentiate ourselves and our family. So we would emphasize our first name. Right. And they desire the opposite. They would want to emphasize a last name. So,
And that was very interesting. And he even goes on. It says Americans also often mess this up. So when we go to other countries, we're not used to the different order of the family name and all of that. I mean, my mom never had a middle name. And so growing up, she wasn't given a middle name. So it was, so then when she married, then it became like her first name, her main name, and then her married name. So that became her three names, Yeah. But he goes on to talk about even conformity, and in a collective culture, there's conformity. You want to do and be part of your family. You look like your family. You act like your family. Your family is a community. Right. And he said, but conformity is a virtue in a collective culture.
Right.
But it's a vice in ours.
Right. Think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
it says conforming is a sign of immaturity, a failure to realize your full potential, an insatiability to leave the nest or cut the cord. Think about that too. Like if you don't leave at 18 and move out, in America, like what's wrong with you? And I live across the street, I live right across the street from a family from India, and it's a mother, her two sons, her two daughter-in-laws, like the entire family lives together. There's no thought of living separately. And I mean, it is a communal family. So it's a very, very different and completely arranged marriages. So, they returned to India earlier in the year to find her son a wife. And even though like here and now 21st century, they're still very much
Mhm.
living in the communal mindset.
Mhm.
So yeah.
And I don't think they're not talking, Lucille, about faith and
Yeah.
conformity versus faith is not.
Right.
They're basically talking about conforming to what your family's. That's how I
Mm-hmm.
understand it. Like
Mm-hmm.
what your family thinks about something, what they dictate. It's more about community. What does your community accept as being normal and being good and being, um, even just part of their own thinking and their own way of doing things. So,
So this is something that kind of came to mind when I was kind of reading through this. The prodigal son. Okay. The prodigal son wanted his inheritance and he wanted to leave. That's a very Western thinking thing. And so when we read through that, we're like, what's wrong with that? Give the guy his money, let him go, And the father rejoicing when he comes back, like, yes, we can kind of understand because we're glad to see him coming back. And as readers, we see that the kid, wasn't doing so well and everything. But think about it now,
mhm.
and more as a, communal thing, him returning back to the community, back to, the collective. And then also then realizing how the brother has now rejected him and rejecting him from rejoining the
Mhm.
collective, that really changes how we perceive that whole idea of the prodigal son. So,
And I think maybe, Lucille, what you're thinking about is even the way they worship could
mhm,
definitely be part of their community, but it you will conform to the way that your family worships and lives out their faith.
right.
It's kind of it's all aspects of their life, not just about their faith. It's
Right.
conforming to what your community does.
He made
So
me
like
think of
even
that.
like the difference between maybe Baptists and just to give, I mean, this is what pops into my head,
Mhm,
but you think Baptist and then maybe you think charismatics.
mhm.
If you're brought up in a charismatic family, then you're gonna like you learn to worship the Lord according to that faith and that style. If
Mhm.
you are born into a Baptist family and that's what you've known all your life, then you will conform in a sense, to the way your parents or and your church even understand scriptures. So
Right.
it can be part of the church, but it's also it's bigger with it conforming to your own community and the way they do things.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so yeah, so
He
hopefully
makes a
that.
little bit of a point that, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but there is scripture that says, and he and his
Yeah,
family believed,
yeah,
I mean, there's several, two or three that he
yeah.
specifically mentioned, when Paul and Silas were released from jail, the jailer and his family believed. It's because the whole family would. And
Yeah, and like Lydia when she became. Yeah,
exactly.
so it's very interesting because it's the same with even like with our family, just because my husband and I keep the feast doesn't mean my children do.
Right.
So they don't do it because mom and dad came to a new revelation of what
Yeah.
to do. No, they still have their own minds and how they do things and how they want to do them. So it's not just because we did it, they do it, and it's not like that in the Western culture at all.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but that's a they make that point and a lot,
Hmm.
and so and as I mentioned earlier, he goes on to say that it's the next part on page 100 says our individualist assumptions affect our reading of scripture in many ways, some of them more serious than
Yeah.
others. And he even talks about what we might think of as a whole Christmas story and how really we don't understand it because we see Mary and Joseph as being totally alone on their little donkey going
Right.
towards Bethlehem, or
Right.
when Mary and Joseph don't realize that Jesus isn't with them when he's 12, like as if they didn't know somehow. How could they not know their child wasn't with them? Well, yeah, because they traveled in like big groups.
Yeah. Well,
So
and it was probably not only big group. We've heard that part of it, but it's his family's big group. Like,
yeah, both sides.
yeah, he makes the point, like, why would he drag his pregnant wife across this country? We don't know that he did it like days of her pregnancy. Like,
Yeah. And
he,
most agreed that he didn't.
yeah,
That
he
didn't
likely
work.
owned land that he was returning to his place of heritage. You know, he was returning to his home.
Yeah.
He likely did it with a huge group of family members because they were all returning. The reason there wasn't room at the inn, if you will, is because the family home was full, and it's not that they were in a cave somewhere or in a barn somewhere. They were in with the animals that a lot of the family members would have slept with, because
they slept near them. They didn't sleep in with them. It was just the area of the house, because they would have had certain areas for guests.
Yeah.
And so, but anybody who got there too late would have had to sleep closer to where the animals were part of their homes.
Right.
It's how they kept warm, because the animals put out lots of heat, let me tell you.
Right.
So there was one part here he even mentioned, like, the reason Joseph was even going there was because of his lineage. So it would have been all these people who were also part of the line of David going there. His wife, and like you said, his Joseph's family, Mary's
family. She didn't just give birth by herself in a stable. Like,
she wasn't there, and Joseph had to deliver the baby. No.
Yeah. She would have been attended, by a variety of family members, her side of the family and his side of the family. Like, I mean,
all the women would have pitched in and taken care of
Elizabeth could have been there. I mean, we don't know, but we know that that's a family member. There's a very good likelihood Elizabeth could have been there. So, we assume, and we've been taught through this story, they're by themselves, and they're all.
This was the point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
And why did they go when they went? Because it was during a feast.
It was during a feast. Right.
And what feast was that? Sukkot. It's basically believed, and if you don't know what Sukkot is, it's the Feast of Tabernacles, or it's when they made their tents and stuff. And so he went because of this feast. And that's why he went, to be with family, and they all traveled together. So, and he said, because even Rome would have given them like a year's time to go back. It wasn't like, oh, you have 1 week, you have to get there. That's not how it worked. So they would have had plenty of time, but he went during the feast, and family went with him. And so it was not a solitary event, he says. So that's an interesting way to look at it, because that's not how the Christmas story gets repeated at all. So
yeah. It says, we imagine Mary and Joseph trudging alone up to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right. No.
And we can't look at it that way. We just can't look at it through our own Western eyes.
Because we have erased the community. We have erased the communal
and
ideas.
The whole culture.
The whole thing. Yeah. So I thought that the other one that we really, really enjoyed, and it totally makes sense, is just turning the page. And
even there at the bottom, if you want to start with the ancient letter writing, they wrote, because before we get to Paul and Timothy, but they didn't write like you come to your office and you sit down with your light and you sit down with your computer or whatever, pen, paper, and you write a nice little letter. No. You wrote wherever you were, and other people would make comments, like, because they also read it out loud. It wasn't like it was a private letter. So people were around listening and saying, oh, I like that line, or oh, maybe you should change that. So it was actually a community event every time Paul sat down to write. No one, it was not him and a pen and piece of paper abandoned somewhere, except for maybe when he was in prison, but other than that, it's so that I thought was interesting. Even their letter writing style, not just the physical style, but the way they wrote and who was around when they wrote. So
Right.
Go ahead. So
Right.
you go on with the next part.
Yeah, so he continues that as well. And the point that he makes is when he was writing letters to the churches, he would have, either received a letter from the church asking these very specific questions like, this is going on in our church, how should we handle this? Or a message was delivered. And it's not like he just sat there and went, okay, do this, this, and this. Like we have all this theology that the church has come up with, and we've eked out of our Bible, and it's not like Paul alone is the one who has made these statements. And the point is, Paul traveled, and Paul didn't travel and go on these missionary trips alone. He had groups of people. We know he got along with some and didn't get along with others, and people would join him at certain points and peel off at other points. And Luke would follow and try to list things that happened, and Apollos would join him and then leave. And then there's all these letters, he talks about so-and-so left him and took my cloak. And by the way, if you stop over here, tell so-and-so I said hi.
It was all about community. Again, it was about community, and not just the churches you might think of it, but they also had family times where they met in people's homes, as well as a big congregation. Right. So some of these letters may have been about individual people, and that's why he will name like certain individuals, because
they knew. He's naming a name to say who it was. But this is the point. He says, after discussing these sticky situations, like, the ladies are walking around with their hair uncovered. How are we going to handle that? Okay, well, after discussing these sticky issues at length, it was time to start the letter with a secretary, probably hired from the market, the stacks of wax tablets. The resulting letter would have been a collaborative effort. So it's not like Paul stood there and said, make the women talk to their husbands before they speak at church. There was probably very specific women they were talking about, or very specific issues he was responding to.
That's why it gets translated incorrectly, because we don't understand that there are times that he's talking about a certain person, and there's times that he's talking about the problems in one community, not every community. He's talking about one community issue.
Reminds me of a Hebrew lesson I had this week that it was, do we know if it's one, a, or the?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I wasn't there, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Whether it's a church or
the church
in Corinth, or in Galatia, because it's exactly, we have to know exactly what it's the what they call that, it's not a modifier, what is it? It's article, definite article. So we need to know, and that's the interesting thing. I have things marked in my Bible, even in Galatians, where it talks about the faith, and it's not translated that way, but it is in the Greek, or even in the Aramaic, it would have been the faith, and they actually will call it that faith, or a faith, or our faith, and it's the faith, actually referring to Yeshua. It's very interesting how we can really, and even like in Acts 2, they were taught the prayers. They weren't taught, we've mentioned this, but they weren't taught just to pray. They were taught the Jewish prayers, the ones that the Lord himself spoke and prayed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that definite article matters.
It does matter. It does matter. So I thought that was interesting, because there's so much that we read, and they go straight back to Paul. They'll go, Paul. And even our writer said, I majored in Paul, right? But it was a very much a communal effort. And, it's not there. I think there's one instance in the Bible where Paul says, look how large these letters are, because they're written from my own hand. Unless unless it's something like that, he had other people writing it. So other people were writing what he was saying. They were discussing it. They were sharing it. How do I say this? I
Yeah,
mean,
it was a group effort,
very
definitely.
much a group effort.
And he
Yeah.
said when they, I was reading some of the comments, so if I missed what you said, but he says in First Corinthians and Timothy, he gives the names in First Corinthians and Second Corinthians of people who were there when he was writing this. Like, hey, Timothy says hi.
Yes.
And, so Timothy's right there with him.
Yes.
And so it's just a different way. And he even makes a comment. Many will argue that Paul couldn't have written certain letters because they don't sound like Paul or Pauline characteristics. That is, they don't sound like Paul. But if Paul regularly worked with co-authors and secretaries, if they actively contributed content and turns of phrase, then this might explain why Paul's letters have variations in style.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and then he goes on, because we do the same thing in our language. In Western individual cultures, the decision to become a Christian is a personal and individual decision, and that's what we kind of talked about. And just to reiterate, in collective societies, conversion is not strictly an individual decision, so it is often not an individual experience. One of the things I remember the first time I heard, like, we say a personal relationship. Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus?
Right.
That's a line that most people in the Western mainstream Christian church would ask.
Right.
But it's not a personal relationship. It's a community relationship. And that's why we're called the body. That's why Paul describes a human body. Here's the eye, here's the hands, here are the feet. Because we're a collective being. We're a collective body of believers. And I thought that was really interesting. But then if you want to, he kind of even talks about the Spirit. And I know I'm probably jumping ahead there, but the temple, do you remember that part?
What page are you on?
Well, I was on 103, but then...
Oh, I'm ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, sorry. Well, we'll just wait till we get there. Because that's where he talks about Lydia and everybody in 104 and 105.
Okay.
But yeah, so me, this part is called Me and Jesus because it's not just about you and Jesus. It's about being a community. It's about being a body. Right. And that's why you can't be an island. That is why, I remember learning about like personalities and how, and it's a great book, but it's called, well, actually, I can't even remember right now. But it's about your 5 top personality traits and your strengths. That's what it's called, Living Your Strengths. And he talks about that the strengths that we are given are never meant to be used by themselves out of the body, in a sense. Because if I'm a communicator or I'm this or that, then I need somebody not just like me, but somebody who can come alongside me and work together, who might be stronger in other areas, or I'm stronger in this area than they are. And especially in your own marriages and your own families, it's about the reason the Lord gives us our individual personalities is so that we can use them in a community.
Sure.
And our individual strengths. So
makes sense.
Anyway.
Absolutely makes sense. Absolutely. Okay, we're getting a little closer. So 104, 105. He kind of goes back into, that's where he starts picking up about the you and your household information.
And then he goes on to individual. Are we on 105? We didn't talk about that part, but I think that's where I was, where he said in that paragraph under individualism, 2 big words for me, collectivism and the church. And he talks about that basically that's what we're supposed to be when we're part in this church that we call church big C. It's more about what we do together. But yeah, so go on.
No, I think that what I have highlighted in here, it just says, in the East, by contrast, family is often identified solely based on bloodlines. But once the relationship, like the phrase, like you can't pick your family, but we do, we really do. Once the relationship is determined, culture then outlines the expectation, obligation to each member. Essentially, then one's identities and duties are defined by the family. And he makes a point like, isn't that Mary's son? We have found the one that Moses spoke about. There's lots of different verses in the Bible that kind of talks about how that is. The way the Bible portrays family, specifically the expectation and obligations are placed on a family in the collective culture. This challenges the way that the Westerners understand our identities and duties as the church and the family of God. So for Jesus, family is not only designating one's immediately biological relatives, but it includes all who are knit together in one faith. And so even though we as, Christians, as we're being grafted into the body of believers now, we are part of that family. So, and the Bible uses language like adopted in, we're
grafted in, we're adopted.
Right. And so
we become Israel. We were talking about that before.
Right. We were talking about that. Right.
And I mean, I've heard people say this and, about being a Gentile, and actually we use that because we actually kind of use that. And I know that some of you don't like it who are listening. But I know that the reason most people use it to say that we're not Jewish, but it was explained to me by a woman recently that when we're born again, when we're adopted by God into Israel, we're adopted into Israel, we're grafted into Israel. So it's not about now, when you were adopted back in those days, your family genealogy was expunged. You were no longer had that genealogy. Your family is now Israel. And Israel being the family of God, being God's people. So we actually are Israel. We're no longer Gentiles because Gentiles represented pagans. They represented in the Bible godless people. Right. So if we really want to be accurate, then we're Israel. So that's my little piece there. But so all of this, the one comment I have on 106 is kingdom relationships are depicted as the believer's primary family.
Right.
So that's what we become. And he even talks about different churches and different, like being baptized as a baby and that kind of stuff. And what all that, how that separated people because of beliefs.
He goes in a little bit more. He's like, Paul uses family language to describe how the church should function. I like this. I highlighted this. It's like dead in the middle. It said, Rome frowned on claiming family ties without cause. Being family gave you obligations. We've talked about that. Tribal clans. We've talked about that. Jesus and Paul's language about church as family was radical talk.
Yeah. So, when my husband came from a Greek family, so he is Greek. That's how he sees himself. And when he came to know Yeshua as his Messiah, as his Savior, his Greek family, he was being baptized. And they're like, what do you mean you baptized? You were already saved as an infant. He goes, no, I didn't make any decision as an infant. I'm making my decision now. And it caused rifts in the family. It caused problems. And so, but that's what they believed. There were a lot. He talks about the Puritan New England, New England, and different churches that, they had a system of infant baptism. And so then there became a split where those who were being baptized later in life and those who felt like they were already baptized and all that. And he goes, they became part of a group, but their identity wasn't determined by that group. If we're not careful, our individual assumptions about church can lead us to think of the church as something like a health club or a country club.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make sure that that's not how we're looking at church.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could find the part. Oh, I guess it's on page 108 about the temple. So
okay. Something that I was thinking of too is the Bible spends a lot of time giving us genealogies and being very clear about what tribe people are from, especially in the Old Testament. And I thought, there's reason for that. I've always been taught, well, this is there to prove that they were alive, that they're going to give you the dad's paternity and everything. But also that statement here, it describes describing how the expectation of how they should function. If you know the personality of a certain tribe or clan, or the responsibility of the Levites, or, by giving that family line, you're describing a lot more. Everybody says how names are important, but also stating, their family and their tribes. That's also important because you should, glean a little more information about that culture and that family line. So,
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Where are you? 208? I'm sorry. 108?
108. Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually didn't say anything to you beforehand, but I love this where he talks about in English, the word you,
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
can mean singular. I can say you guys who are listening,
Mhm.
or you who are listening, and then I can point to, of course, Lauren, and say, did you know that? And so we can use it both ways.
Right.
And he said, but most languages do not. And it's true, the Hebrew language, the Greek language, and all of that. And I found a great example in the Bible, because until like years ago, someone pointed this out to me. So when you read in Luke 22, 32, so this is a conversation between Yeshua and Peter. And he says, but I have prayed. Oh, let me start at 31. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. So if you're reading King James Version, New King James Version, even the English Standard Version, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. So, but if you read some of the different versions, it will say, Simon, Simon, listen, Satan has asked permission to sift all of you. So when you look at this in the Greek, it's saying that basically this is how it would be transliterated. It says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat.
Oh,
so each of you, the you is plural.
Right.
Next verse, but I have prayed for you, singular, Simon, I have prayed for you, that your faith would not fail. And when you, Simon, again, individual, have turned back, strengthen your brothers. So strengthen them. So, so it was first like he wants, Satan doesn't want to just sift Peter. He wants to sift all
everybody. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a difference between you and you, plural, you singular, you plural. And we will read that incorrectly if we don't see that word is plural. And so I thought that was a really good point.
Very good point, because how many times, it's been read, only Simon wanted to be sifted. Only Simon's going to be sifted. I'm sorry. We're all going to be sifted.
Yeah. And so, and who was he putting kind of in a leadership position? I'm praying for you, Peter, because I want you to bring them all back.
Right.
That's your job. I'm giving you. Right. And he writes here at the bit, and I'm just going to jump ahead for a second. Yeah. But 110, he says, and he's given like some things, practices that you can help in reading the Bible. Mm-hmm. But he said, make a conscious effort to read the you in biblical texts as plural. And I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah.
So
Very good point. Very good point.
And then he talks about the spirit and the tabernacle. And again,
okay, you keep mentioning that. Where is that?
That's on 108.
Okay,
so now it's under what I talked about.
Okay, let's go back there because that might be our last thing. We're at 55, so we only have a moment. We have to stop on time. We're going to get in trouble.
We keep going a little late because our outro's longer. So there it says, so Paul asked the Corinthians, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, who you have received from God? You are not your own. And he says we typically understand the singulars and plurals in the verses backwards. So he says in the original Greek, the you is plural and the temple is singular. Right. So do you not know, you all, like you personally, Lauren, do not know that the temple then, that you are a temple. So the temple is plural.
Okay.
Right? Do I have that right? So the temple, no, I said it backwards. You is plural. All of you
are a part of the temple.
One temple.
Right.
And you are not a temple.
It's not that you're walking around as an individual temple that you have to take care of your individual temple.
Yes.
We are all a part of the temple. And you are supposed to minister to the temple. Right.
So that's mind blowing because we've all been told we are a temple of the Holy Spirit. You're a temple. So you don't smoke because you're a temple of the Holy Spirit. No.
No.
You make up one temple.
We are all one temple. Right.
So
interesting. Yeah. It is. We have definitely lost that mindset. I mean, I think years and we had it at one point. We really did. Even I noticed a comment even earlier. Linda had said, we're so separated from community that we struggle to even be friendly. Like, I mean, honestly, I don't even know all my neighbors. I live in a community, very traditional suburb community, and I don't even know my neighbors' names. Once upon a time, I probably. Are we? Okay. All right. Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
We have a couple seconds, but thank you for your comments. And I know we didn't get to all the comments, but Shabbat shalom. And thank you.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
If you missed today's show and want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all of the other live Lamb show archives on the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.